USA versus Dustin Jacob McFetridge.
Please note that we have made every attempt to reproduce the transcript as it actually is. You may notice some sections sound like we have forgotten our lines, or we are stumbling on our words. The transcript itself reads this way. For example, yes, and again, there were times, again, I do not dispute that there were times when he may have risen to the occasion on a particular date, but the problem was the return to that status quo. With that out of the way, I hope you enjoy this look into the courtroom proceedings.
All right. Redirect, Mr. Taylor.
Briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Sexton, I know counsel for the defendant asked you a question, and I don't want to paraphrase, but something to the extent if you can agree that everything in your reports was positive reflected about Mr. McFetridge. Do you remember a question generally to that extent?
Yes.
Obviously, you did not have any records before you at that point to look at. Would that be correct?
Right, yes.
Let me just give you the opportunity to respond to a few that I've just picked out while sitting at the counsel table.
Okay.
And these are all within the records already admitted, Your Honor.
All right.
This is a report that was dated, this is for a time period of September 16th through, September 1st, 2016 through September 30th, 2016, where it says presentation summary. What does that read?
Dustin made no progress regarding his sexual offense dynamics this month. However, he was assertive in requesting time to present and communicated being prepared to do so.
Turn to a report that covered the month of August of 2017. This is going to go over into another page, but can you read the summary of progress this month, again, August of 2017?
Although Dustin has completed a polygraph examination verifying his self-reported history, being absent of any sexual contact with minors as an adult, his history involving online sexual chat with minors has not been verified. This behavior is relevant to his instant sexual offense and will need to be explored clinically as well as verified through use of a polygraph. Of note, for August, Dustin communicated his interest in having internet access. He presented distorted regarding his personal history and abuse of the internet.
Going over to the next page.
He was furthermore rigid and dismissive of the feedback he received from treatment in his group. Dustin's presentation is consistent with his previously identified tendency to minimize and distort his sexual history and sexual offending behaviors. We'll further explore.
Before going on to the next example, would that be generally consistent with your testimony in that Mr. McFetridge was stuck on the very first step being sexual history?
Yes, and again, there were times, again, I do not dispute that there were times when he may have risen to the occasion on a particular date, but the problem was the return to that status quo.
Of course, there are positive notes within these reports. Would that be accurate?
I want to provide a positive note whenever it's possible for me to identify something that a client has done that if we can claim a positive, I'm going to capitalize on that.
All right, I'll just show a couple of other brief examples here.
Of his mother's paramour. This led to processing Dustin's sexual offending behaviors, which he minimizes and distorts. We'll further explore.
This is a report from October 2016 under presentation summary.
Dustin made no progress regarding his sexual offense dynamics this month.
A report dated March of 2016 covering that entire month. Conclusion at the end?
Presently, Dustin has been directed to begin exploring his sexual history.
Lastly, the report covering May of 2016, the very bottom of the page. Last sentence, please.
Presently, Dustin has been directed to begin exploring his sexual history.
And again, that's back in 2016, But as we stand, and as we stood before the petition was filed with the court in the overall treatment step process, where was he?
At the beginning.
Same place he was in May of 2016.
Yes.
Okay, just a few other questions, counsel, for the defendant brought up. There was a mention of church or going to church. Are there concerns about that, and why?
Yes, well, simply put, we do not ever want to put any of our clients in a circumstance that we're going to throw them into and see how well they do, see if it works. We know that these guys have had problems with sexual thinking. That's why they're our clients. And we can't just assume that has cleared itself up and that we should open up avenues of access that they may not be ready for. We do want, and I encourage clients continually to seek out opportunities where they can acquire some pro-social ways of getting their needs met. But we're going to do that in a carefully guided process to ensure that it's successful for everybody involved. So as a client is moving through the stages of treatment and they're gaining insight about these dynamic risk factors and how critical they are to them to pay attention to and manage those, then they're more capable of completing a safety plan, which simply helps them to, that process just simply helps them to be able to identify what those factors are and to have a plan in place should that factor arise in whatever venue, whatever they're asking to do.
So, but in this case, no safety plan was ever developed. Would that be correct?
I don't know that certainly one was not approved.
Would that be because the defendant didn't progress through treatment?
Right.
Through treatment to be able to...
We just didn't have if we don't have the ability to sign off, if we don't have an effective plan in place, when we're looking at these, we've got to ensure not just simply the safety, certainly the safety of the community is paramount, but anything that could result in any type of unraveling for our client is something we have to pay attention to as well. If the circumstance doesn't go well, then they're not going to do well.
And lastly, I know you were asked about potentially some sort of individual counseling as well, and you testified that sometimes, for a very brief amount of time, would that be accurate?
Yes.
With regard to any potential individual counseling for a brief period of time or taking Mr. McFetridge back into counseling in your group, what would have to be the common thread, or what's the most important thing that would have to change?
Simply his willingness to be engaged in open and to be able to kind of see these dynamics, see these risk factors and be willing to work on those, not deflect those.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Miss Pierce, I'll give you an opportunity to recross on those subjects, but that raises an issue.
Mr. Sexton, is there any way to determine the degree of his willingness to engage in the open and group therapy, short of putting him back into group therapy?
Your Honor, no, there's not. Not short of doing exactly what you said. Putting him back in and let's see if he's willing to try it again. And as I said earlier, I think I would be willing to do this. And I think I could speak for the treatment team that doing so on a probationary period mainly, and I've seen that prove effective with other clients that this has happened to.
Would you expect to be able to determine the level of his willingness within, say, 60 or 90 days?
That has worked well in the past, yes, sir.
All right. All right, Miss Pierce. Cross-examination on those last subjects.
I guess if I could follow up where he just left off the question, is it something that someone familiar with CCS and the treatment program could do an assessment and also do individual counseling for a period of time prior to placing them back into the group treatment program? Is that something that could happen as well, say, for instance, with Teresa Fletcher, that there could be a 60 or 90-day period with her?
Miss Pierce, the way you're phrasing that question, you're asking him to speculate.
Well, the only thing, Your Honor, I know that they were colleagues at one point, I believe. Is that fair to say also?
Yes.
Well, if we're going to talk about individual counseling, let me ask another question. Mr. Sexton?
Yes, sir.
As a certified sex offender treatment provider who's been involved in the treatment plan for Mr. McFetridge, Do you recommend individual counseling to any extent for Mr. McFetridge?
Your Honor, I would prefer that Mr. McFetridge come back into treatment with a group, and then as a clinical team, we can assess that and determine the needfulness of that.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. I guess a couple of the questions that was asked initially about a maintenance polygraph on the internet issues. From what was read, that had not yet happened. Is that what you understood from the report that Mr. Taylor read to you? The very first thing, that there was a polygraph, that it needed to be taken in place relative to internet usage, etc.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that... I can't remember if that's the way it was worded. There was something in there about the need for a polygraph to verify.
Right. The need to verify. But that would be something separate and apart that the treatment team would refer for a polygraph. Is that right? That has nothing to do with Mr. McFetridge in terms of he does not get to choose when the polygraph or what the topic of the polygraph is in any...
No, he doesn't get to choose that.
Exactly. So...
If that's what you're... Yes.
So the recommendation was that the polygraph next needs to verify those issues, correct? That was nothing that Mr. McFetridge had any control over.
Right.
And I imagine in your line of work that you often get the question of, why can I not have access to the internet? And that's something that you work through during treatment. Is that fair to say?
Oh, that's a common question, yes.
That's a common question. And it's something that each one of the offenders, whenever they speak about their feelings relative to that, and then in the process they're learning why the internet is probably not a good idea. Is that fair to say also?
Some individuals are going to be able to use that and not have problems with it. I think the thing is, what I try to help clients understand is where for them are the slippery slopes. And we encourage that development of safety plans where we feel that an individual is ready for that and can...
And relative to making progress moving forward, it is a step in the right direction for someone in Mr. McFetridge's position to have made full disclosure to people outside his family, correct?
That is an important step.
And also, that's beyond the treatment program. So, it's a good step for him to have done.
It's all relative to their treatment, so yeah, it's an important step.
Whenever you met with Ms. Betty Parlier...
Yes.
And she came, it was clear to you that she understood exactly what kind of treatment Mr. McFetridge was in, correct?
I think there were a lot of important things that were discussed in there that were clearly understood from a treatment perspective.
Okay.
That both Miss Betty and Dustin's mother learned in that conversation we had.
Okay, but going forward, the more disclosures he makes to people outside of the treatment team, the better that's going to be for his progress moving forward for accountability.
Again, I think what was important there is that we were able to verify that. I've had clients before who have made disclosures, but the way in which they have made disclosure has been in a very manipulative, minimizing way of doing so.
And that's a lot of the reason for treatment. That's the check and the balance.
Exactly.
Because the treatment team, as well as the other members, are a check and balance on the offender.
Exactly.
Let me just ask you, and it may be that you may not have seen this, I don't know, but is this document something that you've seen?
Here again, this may have been something early on. It looks like that was in February 2018. Am I reading that right?
Yes. So it does look as though Mr. McFetridge would have been starting to make progress towards creating a safety plan. Is that a document that you have in your file or that you've seen? Or I know it was before you started in March.
Yeah. I'm not sure that, I may have read about, I'm aware that he is working on something, that he was being encouraged to try and get out of his house. I don't know that I ever did actually see his safety plan.
Okay.
About that.
Okay.
Because I'm not sure I don't think it was ever approved.
Is there anything to indicate that?
Well, Your Honor, this is his copy, so there's not,
There should be...
Well, you see in the file, Is there anything to indicate that?
I've not seen the entire file. I've been provided what was provided to me by the probation office. I have not reviewed CCS's file.
It's a little bit misleading, Miss Pierce, to put a plan on the screen like that and suggest that a safety plan has been prepared when there's nothing that you have to suggest that it was ever approved.
Your Honor, that's why I'm asking him if he's ever seen it, because I've not reviewed...
He says he hasn't, so...
So relative to Mr. McFetridge, he never was able to present this to you? Is that your understanding?
I mean, he may have. He probably presented it in group. I was aware that he was working on a plan.
Okay, so he was working on it, and there were discussions about things that he could improve on that.
We were always having a conversation with Dustin about encouraging community involvement, encouraging him to not be so isolated in his life.
But, and I guess going back to this would be a step in the right direction for him to start working on the progress, or the sexual offender safety plan, for him to start thinking through what needs to happen in order for the community to be safe.
Well, it goes hand in hand. If you're doing a safety plan and you're doing treatment work that is designed to enhance your awareness of what you're planning for, it is a safety plan. So it's a plan, and what is that plan intended to address? And it's simply intended to be able to assist an individual in managing those identified factors, whatever they may be.
Did you bring the file from CCS? Because, again, I've not seen the full file. Do you know whether, a copy would be in there if it had been approved?
I don't know. I'll have to look through.
That's all.
Your Honor, just to be clear, I just talked with Officer Welch, and he approved this plan for the purposes of allowing and encouraging the defendant to get out more in the community under some sort of guidance. It in fact was approved to put that issue at rest.
But by Officer Welch?
By Officer Welch, not this witness.
Okay.
And that may be where the confusion he just had. And, I apologize, Your Honor, because I've not seen the full CCS file, but this is what Mr. McFetridge, he thought he had been approved, whether it was only by probation, nonetheless. And I can present a copy to Your Honor so that you can see that as well. So if I could introduce that as the next exhibit.
That's fine. I see this on the screen.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. That's all. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Sexton. You've been here a long time, and I want to get you out of here. I have 2 questions.
Sure.
Looking at these monthly summaries that you've been shown, there are a couple of entries that appear repeatedly on these summaries that I need some explanation for. One of them is under the section entitled Compliance with Treatment Guidelines. I believe every one of these are, or at least the majority of them say compliant as best known. What does that mean?
Okay, it simply means that, Your Honor, it simply means what it says, to the best of our knowledge. We get to see these guys for an hour and a half a week. We don't know what they're actually doing. We are counting on their willingness to be honest with us about their compliance with the treatment guidelines. Of course, those guidelines may include things like, and do include things like, that you're not consuming alcohol or you're not viewing pornography, and so it's as best we know.
All right, and under that same section of these reports, there's an entry, compliance issues. A number of these say the same thing, which is that Dustin is expected to present for group prepared and requested time to address his sexual offense dynamics at least monthly, but that occurs from month to month.
Yes.
Same language. What does that suggest?
It simply put, and it could probably use some revision, Your Honor, but simply put, it's the expectation that we have for their compliance, that they're expected to present and engage in treatment work on at least a monthly basis.
And I said I had a couple of questions, but this is the third, so I guess I count like a lawyer. But just above that, there's a section entitled Goals Completed This Month. Many of those entries say, none completed this month.
Yes.
Some of them say, not addressed. What does that mean?
And again, here's the variation between between clinicians. One would say that it's the same language, that not addressed means that he didn't address anything.
Well, does that mean that he wouldn't address it, or that the counselor chose not to address it that month?
No, it would simply be, anything about that would have been speaking to that he didn't present this month.
All right, okay. Can this witness be excused?
Thank you to the folks that have joined the Patreon. We continue to grow and it's just awesome. Special thanks to
Dummy Data, Kelp Pill, TechRec71, Cat G, Westmost, Michael's TCAP Channel, M1A, Ramiro-san, TCAP Recipes, Graham, Aerodoe, Dr. K, Amanda James, Tiffany Lockhart, Joey's TCAP Channel, Michelle Simpson, Uriel Gray, Moody Booty, The Lorne Identity, Nathan Ramon, Rhoda's Chewed Tootsie, I'm Just Being Honest, Saul, Claudette, Many Syllables, Patrick TCAP Ireland,
Twink Toilets, friend's mom's cancer.
and the glue that holds this all together, Gooey Hoo.
Thank you immensely to everyone who watches and comments. I appreciate you all so much. See you next time. Bye.